Hey, welcome to That One Time, the place for unforgettable moments and stories worth sharing. Funny, touching, surprising, just like life itself. Grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's dive in. David ambled slowly down the narrow, dusty street leading into the small provincial town bearing the unusual name Severovo. He had arrived here on business. First, there was the flight to the regional center, then a couple of hours rattling on the commuter train. The journey was long, but David didn't mind. He had loved traveling since childhood, so he viewed business trips as a kind of adventure. Usually his professional visits were to large cities. The company where he held the position of lead economist was involved in trading household appliances. It was an extensive, successfully developing network with branches across the country, the number of which grew year by year. And now David found himself in Severovo to resolve urgent issues related to opening another store in their network here. The business was successfully concluded, issues resolved, papers signed without delay. David was accustomed to handling such tasks. Tomorrow morning, he had the return journey ahead, the commuter train to the regional city, and from there, a plane home to his native Petrovsk. Yes, the head office of the large company was located not in the capital, but in David's hometown, and this was a very profitable decision. The evening promised to be free. David decided to stroll through the town streets, look around, see the local sights, perhaps find a small cozy place to sit for a while. He liked Severovo, a quiet and peaceful town. Life here was probably measured, unhurried, settled. In such places, everyone likely knew each other. Here, unlike in big cities, true neighborliness probably still flourished. People gathered together and socialized on their own. David was almost certain. If he turned into one of the local courtyards, he would see a scene as if from the past. Old folks on benches discussing the news, a noisy gang of kids in the sandbox, men bent over a car, fixing something, women, having finished their housework, chatting on the porch of the building or on a bench near the front garden. All this reminded David of his own childhood. Every summer, for at least a week or two, his mother would send him to visit his former in-laws, his father David's parents. How he looked forward to those summer visits. His parents separated when he was just a tiny tot. Of course, he couldn't remember that period, but his mother was full of bitterness towards his father, as according to her, her husband had left her for another woman. He later moved with her to faraway Vladivostok as her parents lived there. He, you see, wasn't interested in either his own son or his own parents, his mother exclaimed with resentment. He completely lost his mind at the sight of a pretty face and long legs. She often recalled that difficult time. It hurt to hear such words about his father, but on the other hand, his father truly showed no interest. He had children born in Vladivostok, apparently a son and a daughter, meaning David's brother and sister. Apparently he had enough other children. He was clearly not drawn to his firstborn. Maybe the new wife didn't want him to communicate with his firstborn from the first marriage? Who knew? He sent money for support, but he didn't participate in his son's life at all. Never once wished him a happy birthday. But his paternal grandparents lived not too far away, about 100 kilometers from Petrovsk in a large village. They eagerly awaited their grandson every summer, and his mother seemed not to hinder these visits. But she was extremely wary of her in-laws, perhaps afraid they would turn the boy against her and speak well of her ex-husband. That's why David spent only a week or two a year with his relatives during the summer holidays. But how happy those days were! His grandmother and grandfather waited for him all year, preparing for his arrival. For 2 weeks, all their attention was focused on him. He was literally bathed in their warmth and care. Abundant, delicious treats, fishing with his grandfather, sleeping under the open sky in a tent in the middle of a field, swimming in the river with the local kids. If he had his way, he would have stayed all summer, and they would have been more than happy. David knew this, but he had to be content with crumbs. It was good that he had even that. Incidentally, neither his grandfather nor grandmother ever spoke ill of their grandson's mother. On the contrary, they convinced the boy that it was hard for his mother alone and that a son should help her, but his mother often spoke of them with disdain. They couldn't even raise their own son properly. They never got out of their village, and their speech is incorrect. Sometimes his grandfather and grandmother would recall their son's childhood, David's father. Usually these were funny stories that made the boy smile or laugh heartily. They were like stories from a favorite children's book. David laughed genuinely at his father's antics and sincerely wondered how this cheerful, brave guy who knew how to be a friend and take risks could abandon his son. Did he really not think about him at all? Was he really not curious about how his firstborn was doing, what he had become? Much later, David learned that his father, it turned out, had tried to maintain contact at first. He called, asked to speak to him, sent postcards, gifts. Bitterness and a thirst for revenge did not allow his mother to give her ex-husband a single chance. She herself told him about this when David grew up. This happened on the day the news of his father's death arrived. An infarct had taken him, still a relatively young man. He had barely known this person, but the feeling of bitter, irreparable loss fell upon him like a slab. Yes, his father hadn't participated in his son's life, but David had always thought that someday they would meet, talk, clear everything up, maybe even start communicating. Now that would never happen. That day, his mother spoke about David's father without bitterness for the first time. It turned out that when the firstborn appeared, the young, inexperienced mother was afraid to bathe the baby. His father handled that. He would get up at night for the infant, seeing how tired his wife was. He would run to the milk kitchen, stand in long queues there after work. And she also told him about his father's attempts to communicate. Yes, he tried to contact you, his mother admitted, wiping her eyes. But my resentment was too strong, and I sincerely believed that nothing good would come of it. He was in Vladivostok. We were at opposite ends of the country. We wouldn't be able to see each other often anyway. Why tear your soul and yearn? It's better not to know such a father at all. David forgave her and understood. He had always felt sorry for her. She raised him alone, dedicating herself entirely to him, never remarrying. Thanks to her efforts, David became who he was, a well-off, successful man. From an early age, she instilled in him that he must get a higher education. She herself had finished a vocational school and worked as a seamstress in an atelier all her life, often taking orders home. He liked the sound of the sewing machine. He could watch his mother work for hours. It was interesting to see this amazing transformation. Here was a simple piece of fabric, a little time passed, and it turned into something new, an elegant skirt, a light sundress, or a robe. His mother seemed like a real magician. Incidentally, the work brought in a good income. In childhood, David lacked nothing: fashionable clothes, beautiful toys, a bicycle, fascinating books, ice cream every day if he wanted. They lived in a nice apartment that had everything: comfortable furniture, modern appliances, even cute trinkets. They went to the sea every year. He felt quite happy. "Study diligently, son," his mother instructed her only child. "You'll study, get an education, become an important person, and then we'll really live." He thought they were already living well, but he listened, of course, especially since he had always liked studying, and it came easily to him. He was almost a straight A student throughout his school years, without much effort. His student years completely absorbed him. At university, he made many interesting acquaintances: parties, trips to the countryside, joint preparation for exams, celebrating their completion. All this resembled a bright carousel. David felt happy. He felt in his element. His mother was a little worried by all these entertainments. She often warned, "Be careful, son, you know yourself. Right now, everything is good for you. A wonderful future awaits you, but it's very easy to lose everything." Then followed lectures on the dangers of alcohol, the risk of getting into trouble or being beaten up, the danger of getting too carried away with parties and failing exams. And she was also scared of mercenary girls who, of course, dreamed of getting pregnant by promising young men and ruining their lives right at the start. These fears of his mother amused him. He understood and controlled himself perfectly. He tried to calm her down, to explain that he had a head on his shoulders, but she couldn't understand that her son had grown up, had become almost a man. She felt she had to protect him, lay down straw, be by his side. Remembering his student years, David smiled. His mother was still the same now, still worrying about him, trying to arrange his future. Now there was a new reason for concern. He was approaching 40, and he was still single. This was unacceptable. She stubbornly tried to introduce him to the daughters of her friends and acquaintances, nice girls from decent families. It was both funny and awkward. David wasn't angry with his mother. He treated it with understanding. He understood. She just wanted the best for him, in her understanding of best. He was perfectly fine living alone. Is it bad? You're only responsible for yourself. You do what you want. You don't report to anyone. But he couldn't explain this to his mother. Sometimes he had brief romances. Some of his partners tried to tie him down, but it never worked out. He firmly cut off such attempts and immediately broke off the relationships. He didn't need a family. Why? What if he didn't become a good husband or father? There were few happy couples. Mostly they argued constantly, sorted out relationships, divided things. And so many divorces. Adults couldn't agree, and the children suffered. David didn't want that for himself, and it was all so complicated. Many years ago, he was sure he had met the one, the only one. These were sincere, deep feelings. It seemed to him that the whole world had changed, become brighter, kinder, warmer. And then came disappointment and almost physical pain. He didn't want to live. He barely pulled through then thanks to his mother, who found him a good specialist. It was frightening to imagine what might have happened if not for that psychotherapist who turned out to be a true professional. He didn't want such shocks again. He consciously chose a path where work was paramount. But his mother couldn't accept this. She wanted to see her son married, with cute little ones. Well, he would get over it somehow. He didn't understand why all these thoughts suddenly flooded him. The small town of Severovo somehow reminded him of his grandparents in the village, his father's parents. They were long gone. They passed away in the same year, almost one after the other. His mother then loudly resented that his father didn't even come to say goodbye, dumping all the worries on his brother. Later, David learned that his father had serious financial difficulties, and he wouldn't have been able to get from Vladivostok so quickly anyway. But at the time, his mother vividly described his father's terrible act to her son, sparing no words. David sighed. With years, he realized more clearly that his mother, his beloved, loving mother, who had done everything for her son, had put pressure on her only son, shaped his view of relatives as if molding him to fit her. Because of this, in childhood and youth, he often felt confused, lost. But what was the point of thinking about it now? He held no ill will towards her. On the contrary, he felt gratitude and pitied her. Not everyone was ready to lay down their life on the altar of a child's future happiness. She had to work hard, solve endless problems on her own. David understood this perfectly, and therefore, as an adult, called her every day, visited often, gave gifts without occasion. He understood. The attention of her grown son and his conscious gratitude were vitally important to her. His feet automatically led David to the station square. In small towns, all roads lead to the station. Well, he could have dinner somewhere here. There was surely a cafe or even a canteen nearby. For some reason, he suddenly craved home-style food, the kind served in canteens. As if on cue, a sign caught his eye. Canteen. David quickly headed towards the establishment. He had to cross the square with a fountain. It was at this fountain that a trembling, dry, and broken voice stopped him. "Young man, I'm sorry to bother you, but I have nowhere else to turn. Please, help me if you can." David turned around and saw a woman, stooped, all wrinkled, in an old faded dress, a bright scarf on her head, dusty worn-out sneakers on her feet. But her blue eyes seemed too young for her age. They looked timid and guilty. Maybe she was a beggar, the same age as his mother, just life had aged her so much, turned her into a stooped old woman. Of course, David nodded and reached into his pockets. Had he taken cash? Usually he paid with a card, but this time he found several large bills. Without hesitation, he immediately handed them to the woman, because, well, it was clear she was in great need. There was so much hope in her eyes. She didn't resemble the brazen professional beggars. "This? All for me?" the woman asked in surprise, seeing the money. Yes, David nodded. Thank you, dear. God grant you health for your generosity and kindness. I'm not asking for myself, you understand? David wanted to move on, but it was important for her to explain herself, maybe justify herself to him, so he didn't hurry. Let her tell her story. It wasn't difficult for him to listen, and it would make her feel better. I have a grandson, Tim. His mother, my daughter, died. So I'm raising him as best I can. We don't have enough money. I can't work anymore. I've become old and sick. I have to ask for help from kind people at the station. Don't think I'm asking for drink. I'm not lazy. I worked hard all my life. I was a cleaner. If it weren't for the illness, I'd still be working now. I wouldn't need help. But I can't. For Tim's sake, I go around with my hand out. He needs to be fed, clothed, educated. You have a difficult fate, David shook his head. You're doing great not to abandon the boy. How old is he, Tim? The woman smiled. She was pleased to talk about her grandson. 12. He's handsome and smart, learns easily, he has a bright mind. But because of our poverty, he suffers. He sees how hard it is for me and tries to earn some money. He washes cars in the parking lot, mows lawns. He gets pennies, or sometimes nothing at all. People are different. They often cheat boys. He spends a lot of time, comes home tired, then there's no time for lessons. And so he's falling behind in school. I tell him, study, Timothy. The main thing now is studying. You don't need to work so much, I'll manage. You need to study to stand on your own feet later. But he doesn't listen, he doesn't listen. He doesn't listen, David repeated. This story touched him somehow. He wanted to know more about the life of this woman and her grandson. Is it hard for you with him? No, why would you say that? The woman exclaimed, throwing up her hands. You misunderstood. Tim is a very good boy. He takes care of me, helps around the house. He only doesn't listen in one thing. He keeps working. It's hard for him. My heart aches for him. If only Tim could be in a good family. He's talented. He'll amount to something. But I'm afraid that with me, he'll ruin his abilities. That's what I worry about. With these words, she adjusted her scarf. The sleeve of her dress lifted, and David saw a bracelet, a thin gold chain with 3 heart-shaped pendants. He stared at the jewelry in stunned silence. No, he wasn't shocked by the fact of an expensive item on a beggar's wrist. It was just that many years ago, he had ordered exactly the same bracelet at a jewelry workshop for the girl he considered his destiny, with whom he wanted to live a long life and grow old in a cozy house by the sea. And it was this young beauty who became the greatest disappointment in his life. Their names were engraved on these hearts, David and Sarah. The third heart was adorned with a diamond. He had spent all his savings on it. What was this? Just a similar bracelet? Or that very one? It wasn't hard to find out, but it felt strange, almost frightening. The woman caught his gaze and smiled. I know what you thought. She's pretending to be a beggar, but she's wearing gold. But you're mistaken. This is a memory of my daughter. In the most difficult times, I couldn't part with this item. Sarah loved it so much. It meant a lot to her. That's why I haven't taken it off since that terrible day when Sarah... It was as if he had been doused with ice water. His heart constricted, beat faster, his temples pounded, spots swam before his eyes. Sarah. The girl with whom David wanted to tie his life, for whom he had ordered the bracelet, her name was also Sarah. So, could it be? No, it couldn't be. Do you have time? David asked. Yes, the woman replied. She looked at him with suspicion. First, he easily gave her a large sum of money, and now he was acting so strangely. Something's happened? We need to talk, David said. I once knew your daughter. This bracelet and her name. Everything matches. Maybe we can sit down? All right. The woman nodded and headed towards a free bench in front of the fountain. David followed her. He met Sarah in the summer, before his last year of university. He had come to his alma mater for mandatory practical work. The building had just been renovated, and students were cleaning the corridors along with a team of workers. Sarah was in this team, a fragile, big-eyed girl. David immediately noticed her, cheerful, pure, radiant. There was something captivating in her gaze. He constantly tried to catch her eye. When he succeeded, Sarah would blush and lower her lashes, and David would feel happy. His heart would sweetly skip a beat every time he was near her, and this happened often, as he deliberately stayed close. It was surprising that no one else noticed her unique beauty. Even Mike, his classmate, a recognized local Don Juan who never missed a girl, didn't pay any attention to Sarah. Well, great, because Mike knew how to handle girls. A couple of words, and any girl was his. David didn't want Sarah to become another one of his trophies. Seeing Sarah carrying a heavy bucket of water, David dropped everything and was by her side. "Let me." He snatched the heavy load from her fragile hands. "Where to?" "To the second floor." The girl didn't argue. On the way, they started talking. Sarah turned out to be a simple, modest girl. It was easy and pleasant to talk to her. Sarah, it seemed, also liked the handsome, smiling guy. The practical work lasted a couple of hours. The team worked a full day. On the day they met, David stayed with Sarah, helping her until the end of her shift. He didn't want to part even for a few hours. When Sarah's shift ended, they went to the cinema. David held her hand in his and knew that his life was taking a sharp turn. Nothing like this had ever happened to him before. No other person had ever meant so much. They started dating. Gradually, they became closer, got to know each other better. Both had grown up without fathers. Sarah didn't know her father at all and didn't seem to miss him. Both had only mothers. But while David's mother did everything to ensure her son had a higher education and a prosperous life, Sarah's mother didn't have such opportunities. She worked as a cleaner, earning pennies. Sarah helped her from childhood. After 9th grade, she enrolled in a construction technical school, not thinking about higher education. "I need to work, I need money, no time to sit in classrooms." After finishing technical school, she got a job in the same team and started earning a salary. They had more money, which was good, because they had to rent accommodation. They didn't have their own place, and prices were rising. That's how they lived. They weren't hungry, but they only had enough for the bare necessities. David was sure they would get married. He saw no other destiny. Sarah was completely his person, sensitive, kind, fragile. He wanted to protect her. She had hard work. When they got married, she wouldn't do this, carrying buckets, breathing paint fumes. He would have a good profession, he could count on a good salary. He would provide for the family, and Sarah could do whatever she wanted, take care of the house, the family, or go study. Of course, he shared his plans with his mother. He was used to telling her everything. "You've lost your mind." His mother was horrified. "How many times have I told you? You're from a well-off family, a student at a prestigious university with great prospects. We have a big apartment. Do you have any idea how girls with no money hunt for guys like you? How many want to move into a comfortable life on someone else's back? No, Mom, Sarah is completely different. You'll understand when you meet her. You don't understand much. You'll have a wagon and a small cart full of such Sarahs. What wedding? You need a completely different girl from a good family with an education. And these, they want only one thing, to have a child by a good guy. And then, manipulating the child, they twist him around their little finger, and his relatives. No matter how hard he tried to convince his mother that Sarah was different, she wouldn't listen. In the end, he decided, come what may. Even if his mother disagreed, he would do things his way. True, the wedding would have to be postponed. His mother would never agree to him bringing a wife into their apartment. She was set against Sarah. Living together would lead to nothing good. There was only one way out: get on his feet as quickly as possible, earn money for his own place, and then propose. He couldn't imagine his life without Sarah anymore. Next to her, he felt strong, almost omnipotent, and at the same time vulnerable. A strange feeling. His heart belonged to Sarah. She could do anything she wanted with him. But Sarah treated him very gently, took care of him, constantly tried to make him laugh. And when she rested her head on his shoulder, in those moments he felt like the happiest man in the world. The offer of an internship abroad came unexpectedly. He was finishing his diploma thesis. Graduation was very soon. Finally, he would have his diploma. He could work, earn money. He planned to start saving for housing right away. Even if it was a small apartment in an old building somewhere on the outskirts at first, the main thing was that there would be a place where he and Sarah could start their life. Quiet, calm, measured, and of course, happy. One day, the rector summoned him. It turned out that a foreign partner had offered the university a profitable contract. They needed bright students and graduates. He would have to spend 3 years abroad and work hard, but the salary, such as a young specialist wouldn't find in the city. David calculated this money would be enough for a very decent apartment. The experience would increase his value. Upon returning, he would easily find a high-paying job. Of course, he gladly agreed. True, he would have to part with Sarah for 3 long years. They wouldn't see each other, would barely be able to communicate, only by correspondence. And so for 3 whole years. A monstrous period. On the other hand, this was the only chance to quickly get on his feet. He had to be patient, endure the separation. Here it was, a real test of feelings. He was sure they would cope. Sarah was upset upon hearing about his plans, even cried a little, but she understood that this was the only way out. Before leaving, David wanted to give her a special gift, something to remember him by, so she would look at it and think of him. He went to a jewelry workshop. He decided to order an exclusive piece of jewelry, something no one else had. Together with the master, he decided it would be a bracelet, elegant, fragile, like Sarah herself, with original heart-shaped pendants, with an engraving. On 2 hearts, he asked for their names to be engraved. The master adorned the third with a diamond. The master quoted the sum for materials and work. It was all his savings. He parted with them without regret. The bracelet was ready in a week. Seeing it, he was delighted. It was exactly what he wanted. Not just jewelry, but something with meaning. Sarah's eyes sparkled with joy. True, she immediately became shy. This must be very expensive. Gold and custom-made too. You deserve the best of everything, David smiled, and you will have it all when I return. Let the bracelet remind you of me and make you happy in my absence. I'll never take it off, Sarah promised and hugged him. His mother, unlike Sarah, was happy with the news. What a clever boy you are, she smiled proudly. They offered it to you, not just anyone. That means they value you. And the trip will do you good. You'll get that penniless little bride out of your head and your brain will be back in place. David didn't argue. No, he wouldn't forget his beloved for a minute. This whole internship was for her. Without the trip, they wouldn't get their own place so quickly. And this way, he would soon be independent, ready for a family. He had to work hard for happiness. David worked tirelessly. It was tough, dealing with reports, overcoming the language barrier, learning a lot from scratch, but he managed. He had a goal, and he was walking towards it with firm steps. He often called his mother, calling from the office or the hotel. She was so happy, showering him with compliments and questions. But with Sarah, he had to correspond. She didn't have a home phone, he had nowhere to call. He missed her voice so much, he immediately started to yearn. The correspondence was short-lived. After a couple of months, the letters stopped coming. He himself wrote almost every week. But did Sarah receive his letters? Probably not, otherwise she would have replied. "Mom, do you know what happened?" he asked on the phone. "Why isn't Sarah answering my letters?" "How should I know?" his mother replied reluctantly. "Maybe your fickle girl has been fooling around with someone? They're like that. You're not telling me something. I'll drop everything and fly back tomorrow. I need to make sure she's all right." "Don't even think about it," his mother exclaimed, frightened. "Everything is fine. She's waiting for you. It's just that there are problems with international mail, temporary issues with international communication here. That's why the letters aren't reaching you. And not going from here either. So don't worry. Just work calmly." It was hard to live all those years without contact. His mother reluctantly spoke about Sarah, preferring to change the subject. When he insisted, she would give him some crumbs, saying Sarah was alive and well, working. David often asked his mother to arrange a phone call. He wanted to hear her voice, to know how his beloved was doing. But his mother was adamant. "No Sarah's in my house," she would invariably reply. David was angry, but he understood that she had the right to say that. It was her apartment, and she wasn't obligated to let in someone she couldn't stand. He had no doubt. When he returned and married Sarah, his mother would have to meet her. And then his mother would see and understand what a wonderful person Sarah was. She would accept her. She would definitely change her mind. That's how it would be. The sooner the better. The 3 years of internship flew by quickly. There was a lot of work, complex and interesting tasks. It was captivating and brought in a good income. On the other hand, 3 years without his beloved felt like an eternity. He missed her voice, her eyes, her scent, her touch. She appeared in his dreams. He saw her in passers-by. He didn't look at others. Although there were options, many young female colleagues who were not against a relationship with a smart, hard-working guy. But he thought only of Sarah. He didn't need anyone else. His mother hoped he would find a decent girl. She often asked if someone had appeared. He had to disappoint her every time. Why would he need someone else? Sarah was his destiny. The internship was coming to an end. He had enough money in his account, enough for a good apartment in Petrovsk, and some left over for a car. A week before leaving, he went shopping, choosing gifts for Sarah. A beautiful dress, unusual jewelry, even toys. It was pleasant to think that he would make his beloved happy. His mother met him at the airport. In 3 years, she had changed a lot. She had gained weight, there were more wrinkles, gray hair had appeared. David was happy to see her. They hugged tightly and went home. "You've grown up so much," his mother didn't take her eyes off him. "You've become a real man, handsome, tall." David smiled, feeling the same way. Youth was behind him. He had become completely adult, ready for a family. They didn't talk about Sarah anymore. What was the point? Mentioning her always made his mother lose her temper. He hurried home, to leave his things quickly, take a shower, and rush to her, to Sarah. Surely she wasn't home now. The day was in full swing. Sarah was most likely at work. Then he would ask her mother where to find her. He couldn't wait until the end of the workday. He had dreamed of this meeting for 3 years. He wouldn't last a few more hours. He needed to see her, hear her voice, look into her eyes. "Going to see her?" his mother asked when he was at the door. He didn't deny it. To her. "Well, good luck," she said, curling her lips contemptuously. David had never been to Sarah's home, but he knew the address well. He had walked her to her building many times. She lived on Factory Street in an old barracks, a 2-story dilapidated wooden building. The disadvantaged area had become even more neglected over these 3 years. Piles of garbage, dusty unpaved paths, overgrown weeds. He climbed the creaky stairs to the 2nd floor. Here was the right door. First, he pressed the doorbell. Realizing it didn't work, he knocked decisively. The door didn't open immediately, but after a couple of minutes, standing on the threshold was an elderly man in a greasy robe with a sharp, unkind gaze and patchy gray hair. Who was this? Sarah had said she lived with her mother. Who was this old man? "Good afternoon," David greeted him politely. "I'd like to speak with someone living here." "He's before you," the man smiled proudly. "What did you want to talk about?" "I'm not inviting you in. My grandchildren are sleeping. I don't want to wake them." Of course," David agreed quickly. An elderly man? Grandchildren? Maybe he had the wrong door? "So, what's the conversation about?" The man waited, seemingly losing patience. "You see, I'm looking for my girlfriend Sarah. I must have the wrong address, but she definitely lives somewhere nearby, somewhere close by. Can you tell me? Your neighbors, perhaps. Sarah." The man shook his head. "Sarah and her mother, Val? Yes, they used to live here. But they moved somewhere and very quickly. This is my apartment. They rented it from me. I don't know why they packed up so unexpectedly, as if they were running from someone. Well, it worked out for me. My son had children, twins, so we moved here. This apartment is more spacious. They left. And by any chance, do you know where and why? No, they didn't report to me. And I didn't ask. I don't need unnecessary information. I'm not used to prying into people's souls. The mother and daughter packed their things in an evening, paid me, and that was it. From their conversation, I understood they were going to another city. Which one? I don't know. David then realized he had lost Sarah, lost her forever. But he didn't give up immediately. He started a whole investigation. He even went to her former workplace, found her friends, and talked to them. They didn't know where Sarah and her mother had gone. She hadn't told them about her plans. Sarah became kind of strange back then. Long before she left, Lucy, Sarah's colleague, willingly shared her memories. At first, she was very sad after you left. Then suddenly she became happy, but it was a quiet happiness. She glowed from within. We thought, had she fallen in love again? But she denied it. But something was definitely happening with her. I know her. Then something happened again. Sarah was pale, frightened, bewildered. I tried to find out what was wrong, if I could help. I felt sorry for her. But you couldn't get anything out of her. And then this sudden departure. Nothing about her made sense. Having found out nothing, David went to the police with a statement. They just laughed at him there. They explained that Sarah and her mother were adults and could move freely without informing anyone. Maybe she ran away from you? A young policeman smirked, looking at the bewildered David. She doesn't want to communicate and you don't understand words. So she left. It happens. You're not a relative of hers. I can't accept your statement. There's no basis. After some time, David lost hope. He realized he would never find Sarah in the vastness of the country. They had never had their own home. They could have gone to any city. Looking for them was like looking for a needle in a haystack. But why? Why did she do that? Did she fall out of love and run away? Or did something happen? What difference did it make now? It was clear they would never see each other again. And then he fell into despair. While he was searching, hoping, it seemed that everything was fixable. But now he knew. Sarah had disappeared forever. His plans were not destined to come true. What was the internship for then? What was he saving for? Why did he leave? Suddenly, he realized he didn't want to live. What was the point? Sarah was gone anyway and wouldn't be back. He thought about the reasons for her disappearance from morning till night. He lay in his room, door closed, listening to sad music and thinking. Maybe Lucy was right. She met someone else? Or couldn't wait that long, left to seek a new life because staying here was unbearable. In any case, she easily erased him from her life, didn't even leave a note. She could have passed it through Lucy or through her mother, his failed mother-in-law. Did that mean he meant nothing to her? Sarah was his world, the meaning of his life, and he was just an acquaintance with whom it was pleasant to spend time. He didn't want to live. He barely ate, didn't answer calls, didn't talk to his mother, who tried to reach out. "Why are you suffering? What are you worried about?" she asked. Well, she didn't wait. It happens all the time. She has her own life. You have yours. This is a normal situation, and you're making a tragedy out of it. Perhaps she wanted to ease his condition, but her words only made it harder for him. Mom. She didn't understand anything. She couldn't look into his heart, understand what was going on there, and there. There was so much pain, so much despair and hopelessness that he couldn't imagine how to live with it. In the end, his mother found him a psychotherapist. This happened after he refused to eat for 2 days. She couldn't make him eat. Then she became truly frightened that he would simply die. A short elderly man in simple clothes came to their house. He was probably just over 50, with graying temples, wearing horn-rimmed glasses. His mother had called him to the house because she understood that the chances of him going to the clinic himself were minimal. He didn't know what efforts and money it cost. This man, he just sat there, speaking softly. At first, David didn't listen. Then he became interested. By some miracle, he really helped. He was probably a professional. After several sessions, David felt like a different person. He understood that life went on even without Sarah, that there was a lot of interesting stuff in the world. It was selfish and foolish to spend time in sorrow, lying on the bed and doing nothing. Her disappearance was her choice. No one is another's property. If she wanted to, she left. She knew where to find him. If she had wanted to, she would have shown up. It couldn't be said that he became happy. The longing for his beloved was strong, but he found strength. He realized it was time to act. Find a job, settle down in life. The psychotherapist advised him to continue treatment at the clinic, but David refused. He felt he had received enough help and could now manage on his own. Finding a job was not difficult. With his experience, he was hired as a senior economist at a local company. The salary was decent. They promised career growth if he proved himself. And he planned to prove himself. Oh yes, he needed to distract himself from sad thoughts. If he stopped, the longing would pull him back in. He felt it. He worked hard and quickly achieved success. Life was changing from black and white to color. First, dull gray, then bright, full. With money, the world becomes attractive. He could afford a lot. Trips to exotic places, holidays at expensive resorts, expensive cars, and of course, women. A young, handsome, wealthy man had no shortage of choices. His mother was initially happy. She was genuinely afraid for him. The sight of an indifferent person spending days on the sofa frightened her. But after years, his free lifestyle began to bother her. "You need to get married, son." He heard this phrase more and more often, but he couldn't agree. He was fine as he was. He felt free and almost happy. Serious relationships, he had been through that and didn't want to repeat. If you love, you become so attached that you can't breathe without them. You become fragile and vulnerable. He still remembered the pain Sarah's disappearance had brought. No, enough. Love, serious relationships. For David, it meant the end of freedom. A person in love doesn't belong to himself. The one he loves can do anything, even twist him around their little finger. Therefore, at his age, he didn't think about marriage. There was still plenty of time. He wasn't 40 yet. He could do it later if he wanted. His mother scared him with lonely old age and having no one to bring him a glass of water. This argument didn't convince him. He jokingly replied that he wasn't sure if he would want a drink. It was foolish to give up a happy bachelor life for a vague prospect, especially since he had enough female company. He tried not to remember Sarah, but she would periodically surface. She appeared in dreams. He saw her in passers-by. He had learned to cope with his emotions. He hadn't completely erased her from his heart, but now she didn't prevent him from living and enjoying life. He had managed to leave her in the past, so he thought. All these memories flashed through his mind at the moment he walked towards the bench with the old woman. He saw the bracelet, and in an instant, all his carefree attitude disappeared. He felt the longing for Sarah again, realized that he would give up all his wealth, would easily part with his freedom, just to have her by his side. But the old woman said Sarah was no longer alive. He was afraid to think about it, hoping he had misunderstood or that there had been a mistake. "So you say you knew my Sarah?" The woman looked at him intently. "Yes," David nodded. "This bracelet, I think I recognize it. Can I see it?" The woman silently took off the bracelet and held it out. She didn't take her eyes off him. His breath caught when the bracelet was in his hands. It was it. The very one. No doubt. An exquisite item. But he looked closely at the hearts. Yes, that was it. Their names were engraved on two. The third was adorned with a diamond. "I am that David." He handed the bracelet back to her. "I gave this bracelet to your daughter many years ago." "So this is you." The woman shook her head. "Sarah was so in love with you back then. Nothing like that had ever happened to her. She was flying on wings. I told her not to get involved with people like that." "Like what?" David didn't understand. "Like sons of rich parents." "Rich? We weren't rich back then. My mother raised me alone, just like you raised Sarah. But still, you weren't our equal. You studied at university, your mother earned well, considered those who were poorer not a match for her son. Maybe she was right. I don't know. But there was one problem. She was against your love. I don't understand anything." He wanted her face to soften. Sarah's mother. She was clearly hurt. But for what? He had flown away for their happiness, worked hard for 3 years, earned money for an apartment, wanted to propose, but couldn't find her, then couldn't find any trace. It was Sarah who disappeared, ran away from him. "You don't understand?" Her eyes seemed to see right through him. It was a scrutinizing gaze. "Maybe you forgot?" Or didn't know anything? David shrugged. I looked for her, he said. When I came back, I looked for her everywhere. I went to your place, but other people were living there. I tried to find out at her work. I even wanted to file a missing person report, but they refused. No one could say where she had disappeared to. No one. Did you talk to his mother? Valerie clarified. Yes, she didn't know either. David realized from her words that his mother was somehow involved. Nothing could be changed, but anxiety was rising in his heart. He was worried. His heart was ready to leap out. Was he about to learn the truth now? The truth he had been searching for so long? The woman fiddled with the bracelet, looking into the distance. Her gaze became hazy. She was transported to the past, reliving important moments. He wanted to snap her out of this state, to learn the truth faster. All these years, he had lived in the certainty that he had left this in the past. He had fun, enjoyed himself, worked hard, and now a chance encounter had changed everything, brought to the surface feelings he had hidden even from himself. He felt lost and vulnerable again. It was physically painful again from the inability to take her hand, to look into her eyes. It was important for him to hear what had happened after he left as soon as possible. But she sat there, her lips stubbornly pressed together, looking into the distance. And David didn't dare disturb her. This was an elderly woman. She had been through something terrible. He needed to give her time to collect her thoughts. Sarah. She loved very much, Valerie began her story. You were the most important person to her. I noticed something was wrong right away. She started staying out too often. She came home happy, glowing all over. It was immediately clear to me. It was about a boy. I didn't pry. I knew the time would come and she would tell me herself. I just asked her to be careful. I thought someone from the team was courting her. But then this happened. Valerie raised her daughter alone. She was from a village but didn't want to live there. She put in a lot of effort to leave and settle in the city. It didn't turn out exactly as she had dreamed, but it was still better than in the village. She planned to enroll in a technical school. It didn't work out. It turned out it wasn't easy to become a student, even of not the most prestigious school, if you didn't have connections and money. She didn't get in, but wasn't too upset. She would stay in the city. She had money for the first time. Her parents had given it to her. Pennies, of course, but her parents had given everything they could, and Val appreciated that. It was enough for a room in a dormitory, and then she got a job as a cleaner in a small shop. She knew how to handle a mop since childhood. The work was familiar, so she had her own earnings, decent compared to village wages. The following year, she tried to apply again and again, failure. She cried, despaired, and decided it wasn't meant to be. Let things happen as they would. She had a job, she had a place to live. She would get by somehow. Years passed. Val grew up, from an awkward teenager into a pretty woman. Men started paying attention to her. She began to think about family. She wanted to take care of a husband and children, create coziness, cook delicious meals. You wouldn't try so hard for yourself, cooking cabbage soup, baking pies. It was different for a husband and children. You would always want to please them. And then a suitable candidate appeared. Lenny Smith, a loader from the store. Handsome, cheerful, never discouraged. Of course, not an oligarch, but Val wasn't a princess either. She perfectly understood that she wouldn't land a professor's son or a millionaire. But with Lenny, you wouldn't be lost or bored. He was also from a village. They had a lot in common. Lenny was practical and reliable. With someone like him, you were behind a stone wall. Lenny didn't make her wait. He quickly proposed. They had a symbolic wedding without a motorcade, a crowd of guests, or a toastmaster. They had no money. But Val had a white dress, not fluffy, not floor length, just a light sundress. They sat with friends and parents in a restaurant, celebrated in a small circle, and went their separate ways. Lenny had been an orphan since he was 12, raised by his aunt. He lacked love there. They raised him until he was of age and pushed him out into the world. So he managed as best he could. Valerie dreamed that a happy life would now begin. It would be easier together. They would manage. They rented not just a room, but a whole one-room apartment. They could afford it with 2 salaries. Leonard made plans. He was going to buy his own place. Val looked at him with hope and pride. If Lenny said it, then it would be so. He wouldn't talk idly. But the plans were not destined to come true. Leonard tried to earn money everywhere. He worked on construction sites, unloaded wagons. He didn't get enough sleep, didn't eat enough. Feeling sorry for her husband, she urged him to give up the extra work, but he just smiled. When we earn enough for an apartment, then I'll lie on the sofa in front of the TV, annoying you. But for now, that won't work. Val felt sorry for her husband. She saw how tired he was. He had lost weight. His face was gray, with dark circles under his eyes. Her heart sensed that this wouldn't end well. And so it happened. The trouble occurred at night while Val was sleeping. Her husband had gone to work, was supposed to return in the morning, but didn't come. Val became worried and went to the station. She knew he was supposed to be unloading. There, they told her everything. It turned out he had finished the work and been paid. He was heading home, but for some reason, he walked along the tracks and didn't hear the train. The engineer noticed a person sitting on the tracks too late. It's unclear why he was sitting there. Didn't he see or hear? The worker wondered. But Valerie understood everything. Lenny was just very tired, completely exhausted. He probably fell asleep there, right on the tracks, didn't make it home, sat down to rest and fell asleep. So Valerie became a widow. She suffered greatly from the loss. With him, her hopes for a family, for an apartment, for old age with her beloved disappeared. During this difficult period, she suddenly realized she was expecting a child. This made her happy and upset. Happy because Leonard hadn't disappeared without a trace. He would live on in the child. Upset because Leonard hadn't had time to find out. He would have been so happy. And how would she manage alone? Her salary barely covered her expenses, and now a baby. The situation was difficult. Most likely, he had forgotten about Sarah, and she naively thought he would be happy. Foolish child, Valerie shook her head. I told her to give up her fantasies. David caught every word. But my daughter stood her ground, saying that you would be happy to hear such news. True, she didn't know how to tell you. Your phone was unavailable, you didn't answer letters. All this further convinced me that you had simply run away, cut ties. I didn't know who was involved. I guessed later. Everything fell into place only now after talking to you. I wrote to her too, often, David choked out. There were problems with communication, but I wrote to her every evening, and it was she who didn't answer. No wonder, Valerie smirked. Your mother. She apparently intercepted the letters, didn't let you communicate. She really disliked the prospective daughter-in-law, a simple girl. How do you know? David breathed out. I guessed. It's a pity it wasn't sooner. Wait. You'll understand yourself. Listen. Not receiving an answer, Sarah decided to talk to his mother. Your mother was not thrilled. Upon learning about the pregnancy, she became furious. First, she screamed at my daughter, accusing her of deception, trying to extort money. Then she threatened to take the child, as he would be left with a mother who had no money, no place of her own. Of course, they would give him to the prosperous father, and Sarah would be stripped of her rights. She said many hurtful things. Sarah stood there, half dead with fear. Sarah was scared for the child then. She already loved him, was afraid of losing the baby. What if David's mother carried out her threats? What if she took the child? Then Sarah realized she had to leave, far away from this woman who was capable of anything. And David. She thought he wouldn't support her anymore. According to your mother, you had forgotten about Sarah. She said you had a girlfriend, that you didn't ask about her, but only shared details of your new life. This seemed plausible, and based on her words, I thought that's how it would be. Sarah came back after the conversation in tears, sobbing, begging to move. She wanted to hide. Sarah regretted it. It was useless that she went to your mother. Nothing good came of it, only trouble. Well, we moved, Valerie sighed. We settled here in Severovo. Why not? Nothing held us in Petrovsk, no housing, no work. So in that sense, we were free. Sarah wanted to hide. She was afraid your mother would carry out her threats and take the child. I didn't believe it, but for my daughter's sake, I agreed. And here we are. They quickly settled in. The town was smaller, life was simpler. Prices were lower, it was calmer. Timothy was born on time, healthy and strong. Grandmother and mother adored the little one. He reciprocated. It seemed that from infancy, he understood how difficult it was for them, so he was perfect. He slept, ate, didn't fuss, was obedient. We didn't live richly, but we were happy, Valerie continued, tears welling up in her eyes. And then the tragedy. With Sarah, like a bolt from the blue. She got sick, didn't go to the doctor, kept working, went around with a fever, washed floors in cold water. She hid it from me until the last moment. I wouldn't have let her, even though we needed the money. I noticed when she was completely bedridden. I called an ambulance. Sarah went to the hospital. Immediately, bilateral pneumonia advanced. They couldn't save her, so we were left alone, just Timothy and I. Valerie had experienced many losses, but Sarah's death hit the hardest. Perhaps if it weren't for Timothy, she wouldn't have survived. But she had to be strong for her grandson, and she pulled herself together. She worked again, cleaned, cooked, supported her grandson. It wasn't easy for him either, to be left without a mother at 8 years old. Her speech flowed smoothly. David was overwhelmed by different feelings. His heart ached from the loss of Sarah. He had gotten used to living without her, but he knew she was somewhere, alive, feeling, laughing, maybe remembering. And now this. But on the other hand, it seemed he had found a son. After all, Timothy by all accounts was his child. Their continuation, his and Sarah's. Why didn't Sarah turn to me for help, even in the most difficult times? David choked out. She knew where to find me. I wasn't hiding. I didn't change my place of residence. I was in Petrovsk the whole time. We were afraid, Valerie sighed. Your mother? She made it clear that if we made claims, she would sue for custody of the child. How were we supposed to know that you wouldn't be on her side? That's why we hid. How could she think that I… David didn't finish. Tears choked him, but he didn't want to cry now. Just don't judge. Valerie gently stroked his hand. We were afraid for Tim, you understand? And fear is a bad advisor. And Sarah was offended at first, because you found someone else. And then she often looked at your photos on social media, where you were with different girls. But there was no one there, David exclaimed. I worked like Papa Carlo to earn enough for an apartment as quickly as possible to live with Sarah happily. That's fate, Valerie shook her head. Fate is a strange thing. And even now, what's the probability that we would meet here? Almost zero. And here we are, sitting and talking. I want to see my son, David suddenly said. Tim, yours. Is he mine? Yours, Valerie smiled. You'll see him. You'll understand everything. Grandma, hi, where did you come from? A slightly hoarse boy's voice came from behind. David turned sharply and saw a tall, thin teenager. It was as if he was struck by lightning. This boy. He was the spitting image of David from childhood photographs, only dressed and haircut differently. The teenager looked at him with disbelief. And here comes Tim, Valerie smiled. Finished already? Yes, that's why I came. They paid me well. Let's go home. You don't need to stand here. Tim apparently didn't understand that David wasn't just a passerby. Stop, Valerie hesitated. I want to introduce you to a good person. This is David, Uncle David. I am your father, David said directly. The word slipped out. He didn't like Uncle David. What kind of uncle was he? You… The boy's eyes widened in surprise. His eyebrows shot up. Of course, this was shocking. But somewhere in his eyes, a flicker of joy and relief appeared. Several years passed. Valerie and Timothy were living in Petrovsk again. David bought them an apartment nearby. More accurately, all three lived together, as one family. David was still not speaking to his mother. Then, after meeting Valerie and getting to know Timothy, he returned to Petrovsk and immediately went to his mother. They had a long, difficult conversation. His mother hadn't expected this. Who would have thought? She didn't know what had happened to Sarah. She wasn't even interested if a child had been born. She believed she had done the right thing, saved her son from a greedy girl, prevented his life from being ruined. At first, his mother denied it, didn't want to admit what she had done to Sarah, didn't talk about the intercepted letters. That old woman told you stories to dump her grandson on you, and you believed her. This boy, the probability that he's yours is minimal. David could have argued. Tim was his, there was no doubt about it. David had an official document confirming their relationship. He had ordered a DNA test almost immediately. Not because he doubted. Tim looked too much like him as a child. The test was needed for adoption, and David was going to take Tim under his wing. The boy had lived in unsuitable conditions for so many years. Now that was over. David pleaded with his mother for a long time to tell the truth. She dodged, evaded the answer. From her behavior, he guessed himself. But then she broke down. She called Sarah and Valerie names, described the terrible future her son would have had if he had tied his fate to her. David looked at her, his lips pressed together. His closest person. She had dedicated her life to him, done so much, helped him get ahead, and it was she who had destroyed his happiness. David tried not to think about what would have happened if, upon returning, he had found Sarah. Timothy would have been about 2 years old. Of course, they would have gotten married, bought the apartment they dreamed of, and lived happily. In a couple of years, Timothy would have had a brother or sister. Sarah would be alive. David hadn't spoken to his mother for about 2 years, but he wasn't the one who initiated the silence. His mother was offended herself. She was indignant that her son didn't appreciate her contribution, and she also tried to forbid him, an adult man, from communicating with Timothy and Valerie. Upon learning that he was formalizing paternity, she became furious. "What are you doing? Have you completely lost your mind? You're going to put your mistress's son on your neck, and the grandmother too. How do you know whose he is? Who knows what kind of genes? You'd be better off marrying a decent woman with a child if you want a family." She said many cruel words about Timothy and Valerie. David tried to calm her, explain his perspective. It was useless. She reacted to any mention of her grandson like a bull to a red flag. She lost her temper, spewed insults. He felt sorry for his mother, but he wasn't going to abandon the child. Moreover, he and his son immediately bonded, and so his mother was offended and stopped communicating. He periodically tried to get closer. He knew that sooner or later she would soften, despite her stubbornness. And for now, he had plenty of things to do anyway. They needed to make up for lost time with Timothy. Father and son often went on vacation, to the sea, to the mountains. The teenager sincerely admired the world, eagerly soaking up impressions. They talked a lot. Timothy turned out to be an interesting and wise conversationalist. Now that he didn't have to work, his studies improved. In the prestigious gymnasium where David enrolled his son, he quickly became one of the best. Valerie was also nearby. How could it be otherwise? She had raised Timothy for so many years. Grandmother and grandson had become the closest people. Of course, they couldn't be separated. His personal life also improved. Finally, he met a woman who was interesting and close to him. She wasn't like the girls he had had romances with in the past. Irene worked as an accountant, raising a son from her first marriage alone, the same age as Timothy. The boys quickly found common ground. "These are some guys," David smiled, watching them discuss something or fix a bicycle. It seemed they would make a strong family. Irene became friends with Timothy and Valerie. Peace, tranquility, support. David felt warm and comfortable, and his mother would understand everything in time. She herself wasn't happy with her stubbornness. He noticed that. Sooner or later, she would soften. That time was near. No one held any ill will towards her. It was just probably hard for her to understand. Everything would work out.